Hey folks, Bill Gallagher of ThrabenU here for the first in a series of, I guess you could call them like video diaries for my Eternal Weekend testing. So rather than streaming this week, I'm going to record a whole bunch of small videos in which I talk about kind of what's on my mind with death and taxes at any given time. And so the first one that I'm going to do here is sort of a breakdown of the list that I intend on playing on Eternal Weekend at this time. It may change a little bit, but here's kind of what I'm thinking about. Let's start with some major things. Number one, I really like 4x Luminarch Aspirant builds for League play. It gives you a ton of power. It is a must answer card, and it increases your two drop density, all of which I really, really love. But I am expecting Eternal Weekend to be very, very blue dominated. Rug Delver and Snowco are the two decks that I expect to see the most, and I want to make sure that my flex cards are hedging towards those. And so I'm opting to play a 2-2 split of Spirit of the Labyrinth and Luminarch Aspirant in the main deck instead of the 4 Luminarch Aspirants that I've been playing. Again, I still like 4 Luminarch Aspirant for League play, but for this tournament, I just think it makes more sense to do something like this. I know a lot of people are running Horizon Canopy lands, or maybe a third Caracas or a Mishra's Factory. But again, I think Rug Delver is going to be the most popular deck. If I play 8 rounds, realistically, I'm probably expecting to play against Rug Delver maybe 4 of those rounds. So I'm hedging towards mana-based stability by making myself not wastelandable and playing extra planes. I lose a little bit in the snow matchup by doing that, but hopefully the stability is good elsewhere. Acolyte Apparition has definitely proven itself as a 3 of in the main deck, and I feel very, very confident on that number. Notably, my main deck does not have a Sanctum Prelate because I am playing Luminarch Aspirants. I think Sanctum Prelate is often too slow in Game 1 scenarios to matter versus the combo decks. So Sanctum Prelate as a 1-of is often a turn 4 play. You recruit for it on 3 and then play it on 4. And if you are tapping out for 2 turns in a row versus a combo deck, a lot of times you're going to die. So if you tap out on turn 3 for a recruiter against, say, something like Omni, and you're not also like porting them, it's kind of dicey that you're not just going to die that turn, right? So I don't know that it makes a lot of sense to play Sanctum Prelate in the main deck, when I also don't really think it's good against Snow, and shutting off your Source of Plowshares versus Delver is super spooky, even with Apparitions. So that's kind of led me to where I am on the main deck slots. Ultimately, I decided that Sword of Feast and Famine, while very good, wasn't quite good enough to be in the main deck, and I decided that Legion Angel wasn't quite worth the slots because it's not tutorable or anything of that nature. As far as the sideboard goes, I've made some changes to what I was doing versus League play. In League play, I was really valuing having 2 Mindbreak traps and 2 surgical extractions as free interactions versus Oops All Spells. But I think you have to be an absolute mad lad to show up to Eternal Weekend with Oops. So I'm willing to hedge in slightly different directions. So I have substituted one of my surgical extractions for a Grafdigger Cage, one of my Mindbreak traps for a Deafening Silence, the other Mindbreak trap for a Gideon. So let's explain these changes. Number one, I think Omni is a very good deck going into the weekend. It's relatively resilient. There's multiple builds of it. It's relatively strong versus blue decks for a combo deck. The green versions have Veil of Summer, which really are a nuisance and they waste counter spells from your opponents. And it's just very good at goldfishing against things like Death and Taxes and Maverick that can't particularly disrupt them well. So Deafening Silence is better than Mindbreak Trap versus Omni in a lot of scenarios. There's a lot of scenarios where your opponent beats you just by casting 2 spells in a turn. So it goes Show and Tell, put in Omni, cast Emrakul, and the Mindbreak Trap is sitting in your hand like awkward. So while I like Mindbreak Trap in leagues, I'm not sure that I'm willing to dedicate slots to it for this particular event. The other combo deck that I think is relatively well suited for the weekend is Hogak. Well, let me rephrase that. I think a decent number of people are going to attempt to play Hogak. A lot of legacy minds that I respect are saying that Hogak isn't necessarily super well positioned for the weekend, but that discourse is coming out today, which I'm recording this on Wednesday the 14th. And so if people have already started testing for Hogak, it might be too late for them to pivot. But I do expect that graveyard-based combo decks, whether it's Hogak, Reanimator, Dredge, something of that nature, I would expect to see some of that around. So I'm going to go ahead and play two Grafdigger's Cage. Grafdigger's Cage also helps me to hedge against elves. I don't have a Containment Priest in this deck list. Um, that's kind of minor. I debated for a long time about whether or not I wanted the second Surgical or the Grafdigger's Cage, specifically thinking about the Hogak matchup. There's downsides to both. Surgical has a lot of targets in the Hogak matchup, which makes it awkward, and that's part of the reason why Hogak can be good against some blue decks, because if Surgical Extraction is their primary graveyard hate and they get rid of Bridge, there's still Hogak to think about. There's still potentially the combo finish to think about. There's still Vengevines to think out, recurring Gravecrawlers. So Surgical's good, but not amazing there. But similarly, Grafdigger's Cage can go and get exiled by Force of Vigor. And when I'm playing like Rip and Grafdigger's Cage and Vial and Equipment, it really sets me up for quite bad blowouts via Force of Vigor. Ultimately, I came down on the side of Grafdigger's Cage. It's fine versus some of the Storm decks as well. Good against Ant, salvageable versus TES. Like it can stop the Echo of Aeon's kills, but it's not really where you want to be because it doesn't stop or even dampen lines otherwise associated with it. And finally, there's the Gideon. I'm not super happy with this slot, but I came down here. I want something that can be played for the Snowcone matchup while also being able to be slotted in for a lot of fair matchups for just random stuff, whether it's the Mirror, Maverick, Goblins, that sort of stuff. I just want some like big fair card. And I came down on Gideon. It's possible that Elspeth can be better to jump creatures, but Elspeth runs into the Plague Engineer problem that, a lot of the X1 humans normally have. Whereas Gideon is not going to be good against some of the new tech that I'm expecting to make a wave this week, which is Felidar Retreat out of the snow decks. A lot of pilots have been very quietly talking about this card as a way to have a non-graveyard reliant win condition for if your Uros get surgically extracted or, they get nuked via Rest in Peace or something like that. And Gideon doesn't look great there because they play a fetch land, they get two cats, you're making one knight a turn, or you're just attacking and a cat is jump blocking each turn. So I don't think Gideon is a fantastic solution. I've been talking with some people about running Armageddon in the slot, but playing Armageddon pushes the deck even more so towards being hedged against fair blue and not being good against the general field. Okay, final closing thoughts about this initial deck tech. I don't think I'm well suited for the mirror in particular. I'm okay with that. I'm hoping to outplay my opponent in the mirror. But if my opponent comes to the mirror with like Pithing Needles and Palace Jailer and I don't know, a white sword or Manriki Gusari or something like that, I'm just going to lose to them. That's just kind of the fact. I think it takes a lot of sideboard cards right now to prepare for Delver, Snoko, and assorted combo matchups, and I feel pretty comfortable about where my 75 is at, with the exception of the mirror and a few fair matchups. I do wish that I had a few more things for goblins in particular, but I think it is correct to just kind of try to dodge that one. The matchup has gotten much harder. Like, it got harder with Trash Master, and it got harder with the black goblins that are all quite good against my deck. And then Muxus came along and really kind of toppled the scales in their favor. Like, we can also talk about Goblin Chain Whirler there, but yeah, That's a hard matchup. I guess the Skyclave Apparition in the sideboard is something I should mention. Skyclave Apparition is really overperforming and having a huge, huge, huge density of removal versus Rug Delver makes the matchup feel largely like a buy on games where you don't just initially die to a Dreadhorde Arcanist or an Oko. So I have two paths, a Council's Judgment, and a Skyclave Apparition that I can bring in addition to the three main deck Skyclaves and four Swords to Plowshares. So it's much more realistic that I will see 2 to 3 removal spells over the course of a game, which is really what you need to do to beat Rogue Delver. If you keep them from sticking a threat that is going to snowball and beat you, their deck isn't doing a lot. Like, they can trade 2 for 1 or 1 for 1 all they want for all these little crappy creatures, but if they're not clocking while they're doing that, eventually the Pierces and the Dazes and whatnot are not going to be countering my stuff anymore. Yep, okay. So that's the end of Video Diary 1. Expect a handful of these to be assembled into a playlist to kind of work through my Eternal Weekend testing process. See ya.